Hello, here's Faye. It's the end of September now, and I thought I'd do a bit of an ambitious wrap up of the last 3 months of my reading. So, July, August, and September. I've moved and I've started a new job. So, this maybe is also a little bit of a chat about how I fared with my everyday life changing so much and still trying to keep on reading because I enjoy to read and I didn't want to give up on that just because my life was changing so much. So, in those 3 months, I read 15 books. Today, I guess I still have one more day, but I won't be reading a whole book today. 15 books, averaging out to 5 books a month, I guess. And the average rating I gave those was 3.1 stars. Kind of stick with the Goodreads stars rating because that works for me. So in July, I read 8 books, and I'll just sort of run through them and maybe talk about what I still remember. The first book was it was the last book club book of mine in my book club in the town that I moved away from. We read I, Robot, don't know why I said that in a weird way, by Isaac Asimov. And I ended up giving this 4 stars, not because I thought it was the most amazing book ever, but because it's such a sort of cult sci-fi book and I could really appreciate what was started in this book. So in I, Robot, basically it's almost like a collection of short stories all about the 3 laws of roboticism. I don't actually remember how they're called. But in those 3 laws, Isaac Asimov, in a sort of fictitious way, sets up the laws that robots can't harm humans. And then he has these little short stories playing out how those laws would work and how there are still flaws inherent to those laws, even though they were formulated in a way to protect humans as well as possible. And I guess with artificial intelligence, that's just always an issue that authors that choose to write a sci-fi story run into. How do they deal with artificial intelligence? So I really liked how he dealt with it, even though it wasn't anything innovative, but because it's such a classic, I guess it was innovative at the time. I'm not actually sure, but I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt and enjoyed this one, giving it 4 stars. Then I read Cozy Minimalist Home by Gwilyn. Is that a name? Smith? I very much read this to just get pumped for my move. This is sort of trying to satisfy everyone. Minimalism in styling your home because that's just so in, but also being cozy and having things that you like. I even listened to it on audio, which I wouldn't really recommend. This is very much about how you want your house to look. So I guess if you read it, at least you have sort of the satisfaction of looking at pretty pictures, pretty sort of interior design pictures, I'm guessing. Not an amazing one. I did like the one recommendation, I guess, to sort of go room by room when trying to set up a new house so you don't get overwhelmed and you have at least one room that feels homey to you. But not amazing. 2 stars. And then I read Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I had yet to read that and I really wanted to. A classic horror story about Frankenstein and his monster. I really liked this one. It was much more sort of nature writing and romantic than I had expected, but I really liked that. And I'm just glad that I've sort of like read this classic. I'm gonna admit that not that much stuck to me. It was a bit of a downer. I don't know, I kind of thought like a classic horror movie would be sort of a bit more thrilling to me and I'd enjoy that, but no, it was quite a somber read. Then I read Whistle in the Dark by Emma Healy, which according to Goodreads is the book that got the lowest rating out of these 15 books. I think it has an average of 3.08 stars, something like that, and I only gave it 2, even though it started really strong for me. It's about a teenage girl that goes missing and then returns and claims to not remember anything that happened. She goes missing on a sort of art, sort of getaway, workshop-y trip with her mum. she claims that she doesn't remember anything. She's a very troubled teenager, and it sort of drives her mum nuts. And I liked how it started off. I also liked how it was quite choppy in the way it was written from the point of view of the mother, and the sort of family dynamics played into it a lot. I thought I was sort of reading a domestic thriller and enjoyed it for that. And then it just started to drag on, and I started getting annoyed with sort of not moving forward in the story and just getting all these like tidbits of their everyday life. And this one didn't sort of finish strong for me either. I followed that up by a sort of middling read with 3 stars, First Love by Ivan Turgenev, a Russian author who is part of the Great Loves collection, these penguin books that I've harped on about quite a bit because they're just so pretty. And this one is a 3 out of 5 stars because what? I don't know. Do I just admit that I don't remember much about this? Yes, this is a 3-month month wrap up. I don't remember too much. It's about the main protagonist's first love. The sort of plot twist I do still remember, and it wasn't unexpected. Double negative to me. I expected it. There you go. So that was a bit disappointing, but it was, from what I remember, I quite liked the writing, so I did give it 3 out of 5 stars. I don't know, maybe I'm just making that up. But after that, I finished Beartown by Fredrik Backman, which is my only 5-star read in the last 3 months, and is also the highest rated, also has the highest average rating on Goodreads. I'm not in practice anymore. I'm stumbling over my own words all the time. Beartown now has a sequel, which I want to read. Beartown is about a small town that is obsessed with ice hockey, especially their youth team, and then something horrible happens, and that sort of gets the whole town invested. I thought this was just so engrossing. I love how Fredrik Backman writes. I really like the characters he creates. I think every one of his books that I've read so far would work amazingly on screen, which is weird that I say that because I think 2 of his books have been turned into movies and I haven't watched them. Maybe I just enjoy reading them and enjoy having such a clear image in my mind of what those characters would be like. It's a hard topic that he discusses in the book. I was slightly spoiled before starting to read it, but didn't think the reading experience lacked because of that at all. I highly recommend it. I think it's also, Fredrik Backman I think is also quite a good recommendation for people who don't tend to read as much sort of adult fiction, whatever that genre is supposed to say. I don't mean adult fiction as in adult romance. I just mean people who read a lot of sort of YA fiction will also like Fredrik Backman. I think there tend to be quite young protagonists in his book, especially in Beartown that is the case, but it's hard hitting in the content, so be warned. Then I read 2 more of the Great Love Penguin books. I'm sort of speeding through this. It's really weird talking about the last 3 months. I'm reading this off my list, Something Childish But Beautiful? I had to abbreviate this in my list, by Catherine Mansfield, which is a 2-star read of mine. So I'm also really hazy on the content. This was a short story collection of Catherine Mansfield, and I just didn't think it was that interesting. Lots of social commentary in a way as well, which just felt a bit flat for me. I think a different reader would enjoy this one more. It wasn't for me. And I also read Bonjour Tristesse by Françoise Haguin. Is that how you pronounce her? Don't know. This apparently was quite a breakthrough hit when it was published. I also really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. And this is sort of the story of a spoiled teenage girl on holiday with her dad, and how she really, really is irked by the new love interest of her dad who turns up. I thought this at times was, I can really understand why people would read the story and get really annoyed with the main character, but teenagers don't always do things that as adults we find very sensible or likable even, but I thought it was really realistic with a sort of egocentric black and white mindset. Again, not saying that every teenager is like that, but I was a teenager myself and I was far more black and white in the way I saw sort of ethical questions. I did think that was convincing and that was done well. So I do recommend it. It's, again, not a long book, and none of the Great Love Penguin books are. And I thought this was a great one. So those were all the books I read in July. My bad. Then I remembered incorrectly, because the first book I read in August, which was Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe, that was the highest rated book on Goodreads. Not by me, but I did still give this 4 out of 5 stars. I thought this was a really sweet story about the friendship of 2 boys who are both different, both don't have loads of friends, but we warm to them immediately, and it's their story of friendship and possibly something more, them questioning their sexuality. And I thought this was great. Everything about it was heartwarming. I liked the ending, and I thought it like looked at 2 sort of like outsiders in a nice way, because really often I find that when we talk about outsiders, it's sort of like teenagers that like are a bit off, and it's always sort of a story of like how unfair it is that they are pushed outside or bullied. And although that is of course true, I always think that's a bit simplistic and moralistic. And in this case, we have 2 boys who aren't alone. They are sort of slightly loners, but they're not alone. They're not sort of bullied. They still have good relationships with their families. And I just thought that was a bit more of a nuanced story. And I really enjoyed this one. Next, I read Hooked by Elizabeth Hunter, which is the second book in the, I think it's 7th and main series. This is a series of romance stories centered around this small town. The first one, Ink, was a book that I thought was hilarious, about this woman who opens up a quaint little bookshop, and to make every business work and to be profitable, the hunky tattoo artist looking for a place to tattoo his customers moves into the bookshop as well. That was great, but that's not the book I'm talking about. The book I'm talking about is Hooked, which is the second one, and we meet characters that were in the first book as well. The best friend of the female character of the first is now the main protagonist, and she's a sort of very sort of fashion forward, curvy girl, and the love interest is a sort of very sort of like outdoorsy guy who loves to go climbing. That's what Hooked is about. All that sort of play on words in this sense. I didn't like this one as much as I liked Ink, unfortunately. I only really gave it 2 stars. Why did I only give it 2 stars? Oh yeah, it played out exactly the way I expected it to. And although I don't expect my romance novels to be revolutionary and surprising at every turn they take, this one is a bit too straightforward for me. I thought it was quite fun that the main protagonist in this one has a sort of side hustle on like oversized or plus size, not oversized, plus size fashion Instagramming. I thought that was kind of cool, but on the whole, a bit of an average one that still moved quickly, and I still like the writing of Elizabeth Hunter. I do also now want to read the 3rd one, which is out already, but yeah, this was very much a quick fix romance read. Then I wanted more romance. I always want more romance, and read The Wedding Party by Jasmine Guillory. This is the 3rd book in that sort of wedding series. I still like the first one best, thinking back about it. The first one is The Wedding Date. This one is about the best man and the maid of honor, how they hate each other, but for some reason they keep on having sex. And I just thought their supposed hate for each other was a bit spurious. Is that the word? I just didn't think it was convincing. Like, after they sort of had sex for the 3rd, 4th time and had good conversations and kind of got along, I was a bit weirded out that they kept on hanging on to the fact that they don't like each other anymore. I just thought that was a bit weird. So not the best, but I am now committed in the series, I think, so I think I'll just probably keep on going as long as these books keep on coming out, to be honest. And then, funnily, after 2 romance novels, I read a non-fiction book called The State of Affairs by Esther Perel. This is a Belgian clinical psychologist therapist, but she's based in New York, I believe. She has a really cool podcast that you might want to check out. What's it called? I think Where Do We Begin? Or How Do We Begin? Where Do We Begin? So she does couples therapy and counselling, and The State of Affairs is all about, well, basically the meaning of affairs and how harshly we criticize people who have affairs, and also how much we criticize people who decide to stay together with someone who cheated on them. But unfortunately, I thought there was very little that was sort of really like original new material to me. She talks a lot about sort of just examples of couples that she's counseled herself, which is interesting in almost a sort of voyeuristic way, hearing what goes on in other people's love lives. But there was a lack of sort of really like new ideas to me. I don't think it's a huge taboo really to be talking about affairs. I don't think it's shocking to hear that some people have open relationships. I've heard that before. And it was also centered a lot about affairs in marriages, or just sort of the married couple in general. And that's almost a bit dated to me. I don't know. Like, yes, of course, people still get married, but I don't think a married couple is the only couple that has a sense of commitment and loyalty, and cheating in a non-married entity can be just as severe. So I didn't really understand that focus, to be honest. She's written other books, and I think I might check them out. I sort of hoped that it would be a bit more scientific. It's very much sort of just her sort of colloquial talk about these couples, and I thought, because, you know, she is a trained psychologist, she would have a few more sort of studies backing her up. She doesn't really do that, and I think I might be wary of that in her other books. I might then sort of cut them short if I see that happening again. This is maybe also a good moment to mention that I DNF'd 2 books in those last 3 months, which is quite a lot for me. I DNF'd after a sort of solid 100 pages, Machines Like Me by Ian McEwan, which is devastating to me because I love some of Ian McEwan's previous books, and this one just really didn't work for me. It's all about this line of robots with AI, which coming full circle here after I, Robot by Isaac Asimov. And Ian McEwan just isn't a sci-fi author, which is no problem. Anyone can write sci-fi, but there was just nothing unique. And this being written, I think it was published this year even, I do expect you to move onwards a bit. And then he sort of weirdly sets the story in a Margaret Thatcher UK setting, sort of alternate history, where the UK has progressed in sort of technology and robotics far quicker than obviously they did, because they have these super advanced robots. And yeah, the robots are called Adam and Eve. Like I think there's like 12 male robots, 12 female robots, and in our story, this guy buys an Adam, I can't pronounce that robot, and sort of shares him with his maybe girlfriend, definitely neighbor, and it's just all a bit. It almost reads a bit like sleazy at times. I didn't really understand whether he wanted there to be such a sort of heavy sort of sexual flavour to the story. I really didn't vibe with it. So I gave up on it, which was hard for me, but I did. And the other one I DNF'd very recently was Icy Passage by Anne Gimple, which is one of the books that I wanted to read for Tome Infinity and Beyond in September. And I got decently far with this. I reckon I read the first 200 pages or so. This is a romance, paranormal, science fiction novel, which, you know, wants to do a lot of things but doesn't do many of them. We have these two scientists, doctors, aboard a ship transporting one type of mutated prokaryotes, how do you pronounce that word? I don't know, bacteria, to another set of mutating bacteria somewhere in Antarctica, because something is sort of paranormally telling them to do so. I don't know, they want to have sex with each other, but they sort of need a long time to do that, and then need to rush around to doctor around on other people and talk about seasickness a lot. It's boring, so I DNF'd it. The three books that I did read for Tome Infinity and Beyond, which is a science fiction based readathon, which was now in its third installment, today is the very last day, were Ink by Sabrina Foulias, which is set in sort of Central America and to the border of the States, and this is sort of in a sort of not too distant future, I guess, where immigrants have different kinds of tattoos, barcodes tattooed onto their skin that let everyone know what their status is. It's my dog complaining about people going up and down the stairs. She does that. And this one I just thought was quite harrowing to read, given the times currently. It didn't seem like such a far stretch. What was unexpected about it, however, was that sort of there was like a bit of sort of like magical realism mixed into it, which I appreciated, but I do understand if other people didn't really come for that in that story, or picked up the book for that aspect, but I really liked it. Again, we sort of follow different characters. I think sort of the main cast, like 6-7 characters. I needed a little while to get in, but then felt quite strongly towards them. And really liked this one, gave it 4 stars. I gave 3 out of 5 stars to a book called Obernewton. I keep on wanting to look up how to pronounce this, but I don't know how you do. This is the first one in a sort of middle grade YA series by a woman called Isabel Carmody. Is that it? Carmody? This is the video of not knowing how to pronounce things. She's an Australian author, and in this book we follow an orphan girl who is taken from the orphanage to Obernewton, which is a kind of castle, and all these different children end up there because they are deemed to be misfits and have some kind of genetic mutation, we think, after this big apocalypse called the Great White. And there's sort of shady business going on, and we don't really know who the baddies are. Is the big system of the council that sort of rules the land the baddies, or are the people who are sort of running this castle and keeping these children captured effectively the baddies? I mean, they don't sound like goodies, do they? But yeah, the main character doesn't know whom to trust. She can converse with animals and hear their thoughts, and she can also hear human thoughts. And I don't know, I thought this was really sweet. Yes, I guess I'm not really the target demographic for this book, but I enjoyed it nevertheless. And if I feel like a bit of a quick sort of fantasy read, I think I might actually read the second one. And then the very last thing I read, is a short story, The Slow, Sad Suicide of Rohan Gujaratney, by an author called, what was it? Yudhanjaya Wijaratne, I'm thinking. This is a Sri Lankan author, and this short story was only okay to me. But if you're a bit more of a science fiction buff, I think you might like this one a bit more than me, to be honest. We have this sort of bored, spoiled young guy who keeps on trying to kill himself. And because of some medical procedure that his parents paid for, some kind of life insurance, he can't. He doesn't succeed in killing himself. And then he signs up for this project to be shot into a black hole, which he's thinking will sort of then be the final hurrah to finally kill himself. And it's quite tongue-in-cheek, dark humor, not surprisingly, with such a subject matter. Not the foreword, but there's sort of like 3 sentences or so by the author preceding the short story. And he sort of lists something like, this story is about questionable physical laws, suicide, religion, and drugs. Was that maybe the last thing he mentioned? And he cautioned the reader that the reader should like at least 3 out of the 4, or be interested in 3 out of the 4, and I was. But again, somehow I think I don't love novellas, and I think this is more of a novella than a short story. I think this was sort of just under 70 pages, and I feel like some things could have been fleshed out in a bit more way if it had been longer, and if it had been shorter, then the sort of message could have been a bit more punchy. And this way is sort of this middle ground. I don't know, I never really vibe really well with novellas, even if it's a totally different genre. So yeah, I didn't end with a bang. I ended with a 3 out of 5 stars read, which is really representative for my average rating in those last 3 months. This is a very, very long video, I'm sorry. I thought I'd just catch up and say, boy, is it hard to keep on reading when you have life coming your way. Those were the last 3 months of my reading. Onward and upward. Hopefully I can keep on with the trend of reading good books, and I'll talk to you very, very soon. Bye guys.